Welcome back to Blooming Resistance, where we plant seeds of courage and grow communities of care. I'm Kate, and today we're talking about borders and belonging, and about the people caught between them, the history that created them, and what it really means to be home. And when I say borders, I don't just mean fences on maps. I mean the laws, the walls, the policies, and the people that decide who is worthy of safety and who is not. Let's begin with what's happening now in Chicago and in Portland, because these aren't isolated moments. They're part of a broader national pattern. In September 2025 in Chicago, ICE recently launched Operation Midway Blitz, an ICE enforcement surge targeting undocumented immigrants in and around Chicago. Residents say agents are targeting work sites like Home Depot, parking lots, and catching people not on any arrest list. Videos have shown ICE agents taking people into custody in broad daylight, masked tactical gear, and sometimes without clarity as to the charges. In one of the most dramatic raids, federal agents reportedly rappelled from helicopters into apartment buildings on Chicago's South Side, arresting 37 people, including children. Schools have become zones of anxiety, know your rights leaflets are being handed out in classrooms, staff are conducting sessions about what to do if ICE shows up. The city is now deploying National Guard troops. 500 have been authorized to back up ICE and other federal agents. Illinois and the city of Chicago have filed lawsuits accusing the federal government of overreach and unconstitutional deployment of troops, although these deployments have been temporarily halted. Mayor Brandon Johnson has taken steps to resist this. He's issued an executive order designating ICE-free zones in schools, libraries, parks, and parts of the city, barring ICE from using those spaces without warrants. These tactics are not just about locating criminals. They create and instill fear. They chill community life, and they remind immigrant families that any day someone may vanish. And then there's Portland. Trump has ordered troops to be deployed there to protect federal property, especially ICE facilities. But here's where local pushback has had legal force. A federal judge temporarily blocked the deployment of National Guard troops to Portland, citing concerns over state authority and the justification used by the federal government. Meanwhile, the city has taken its own steps of resistance. Portland is a declared sanctuary city. Its police don't cooperate with ICE unless required by federal law. The city is issuing a land use violation notice to the ICE building, alleging the facility has held detainees overnight, violating local permits limiting detention to 12 hours. There are protests outside the ICE field office in South Waterfront that have been ongoing for months. Actions range from peaceful marches to civil disobedience, and just recently police arrested 2 people protesting at the ICE facility, charging them with assault and harassment. In Portland, the tension is not just about the threat of federal force. It's already being felt in the daily strain on neighborhoods, in protests that stretch late into the night, and in the anxiety residents feel when they see armored vehicles or hear rumors of raids. And these stories in Chicago and Portland are tied together. They're not just local, they're national signals. They tell us who the administration is targeting, how far they're willing to push, and how communities are fighting back. So when we talk about borders, we're not just talking about lines on a map. We're talking about who gets to belong and who's told they never will. Before we can understand what's happening in Chicago or Portland, or even at the southern border today, we have to look back. Because family separation didn't start with Trump, and border enforcement didn't start with ICE. These stories go way back, through generations, and the deeper we go, the more we can see that the lines drawn on a map were never just about geography. They were about control, about belonging, and about who gets to be seen as human. So let's start at the beginning, before the US even existed. The first borders drawn on this continent weren't immigration lines. They were lines of conquest. European colonizers carved up indigenous land, deciding who could live there, who could move, and who could not. They created reservations. They forced removals from the Trail of Tears to the Long Walk of the Navajo, separating families by thousands of miles. Children were taken to boarding schools, told their language and culture were illegal, and that was the first family separation policy on this land. Those boarding schools ran for more than a century. The last federally run one closed in the 1990s. Generations of children never saw their parents again. So when we see ICE tearing children from their parents now, it's not new. It's the same machinery, just with different uniforms. Then came the 1800s, when America decided to invent the concept of illegal immigration. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first major federal law banning immigration based on nationality. It barred all Chinese laborers and denied citizenship to those already here. Chinese workers who had helped to build the railroads were suddenly told they didn't belong. Families were split for decades because wives and children were refused entry. Men lived in bachelor societies, entire towns of lonely workers who sent letters across the ocean waiting for permission that would never come. The exclusion era also created the paper sons phenomenon, where immigrants bought fake documents to claim they were related to U.S. citizens, because that was the only legal pathway left. The U.S. built detention centers like Angel Island to interrogate and separate families, the prototype for today's ICE facilities. And if you visit Angel Island today, you can still read the poems carved into the wooden walls. Lines like, "America has power, but not justice. I have been detained for months. I am like a caged bird." And amid that cruelty, one man, Wong Kim Ark, refused to accept the idea that he could be born here and still be treated as an outsider. Wong was born in San Francisco in 1873 to Chinese parents who were not U.S. citizens, because under the exclusion laws, they weren't allowed to be. He grew up in California, he worked here, he lived here, but when he returned from a trip to visit family in China, immigration officials refused to let him re-enter his own country. They told him, "You're not American," and he fought back. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that the 14th Amendment, ratified after the Civil War, promised citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. And in 1898, in a 6-2 decision, the court agreed. United States v. Wong Kim Ark affirmed that birthright citizenship is guaranteed by the Constitution, no matter your race, no matter your parents' status. The ruling still protects millions of people today, including the children of undocumented immigrants. And it came right in the middle of an era built on exclusion, when the U.S. government was doing everything it could to say certain people didn't belong. Wong wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting to make belonging a birthright, not a privilege. So even as the walls went up, someone found a way to plant a seed, one that would grow into a constitutional promise that if you are born here, you belong here. After the Chinese exclusion era, the target shifted, but the pattern stayed the same. Fear met power, and once again, the government turned entire communities into scapegoats. During the Great Depression, when jobs were scarce and poverty spread, politicians and newspapers started pointing fingers again. And just like that, Mexican immigrants and even Mexican Americans became the convenient blame. From 1929 through the 1930s, federal and local authorities launched what they called repatriation drives. But most of those deported weren't repatriated to their homeland. They were forcibly removed from their homes here. Historians estimate that over 1 million people of Mexican descent were deported or pressured to leave, and nearly half were U.S. citizens by birth. Buses and trains were filled with families rounded up from schools, from factories, from neighborhoods. No hearings, no lawyers, no translators, just fear. Some were tricked into signing voluntary departure papers they couldn't read. Others were told they'd lose their jobs or relief aid if they didn't leave. So families who had lived in Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago for generations found themselves dropped off across the border in a country their children had never even seen. That was the 1930s version of go back to where you came from. But they had come from here. In the 1940s, after Pearl Harbor, the government turned its gaze inward again. 120,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of them U.S. citizens, were taken from their homes and imprisoned in camps across the country. They called it relocation, but it was incarceration. People could bring only what they could carry. Homes, shops, farms lost. Entire families separated into barbed wire camps in deserts and swamps. In one camp, a young girl named Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga started journaling. She wrote, "I keep trying to understand what I did wrong, why we're here." And decades later, Aiko would become one of the key researchers who'd uncovered government documents proving the internment was based on lies and racism, helping win a formal apology and repatriations from the US government in 1988. But for most families, the scars never healed, and the legal precedent that allowed these camps, Korematsu v. United States, was never truly overturned until 2018. In the 1950s, the US government launched Operation Wetback, a mass deportation campaign targeting Mexican and Mexican American workers. Over 1 million people were rounded up, deported, many without due process. Officials bragged about the efficiency of deportation trains and buses, but behind that language were human beings. Fathers taken from fields, mothers from kitchens, children crying in the streets. Newspapers called it cleanup. Sound familiar? The same decade, Border Patrol was formalized as a permanent force. It was given broad authority to operate within 100 miles of any U.S. border, a zone that today covers nearly 2/3 of the American population. That means ICE and CPB can legally stop and search people in places like Chicago, New York, Portland, or Detroit, all under the logic of border enforcement. Under Bill Clinton, the U.S. ramped up militarization at the southern border, building the first stretches of wall and enacting Operation Gatekeeper and Operation Hold the Line. The idea was prevention through deterrence, making crossing so deadly that people would stop trying. Instead, deaths skyrocketed. People began crossing through deserts, and thousands have died since. Then came 9/11, and with it the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, merging immigration and counterterrorism, and that's when ICE was born. From 2003 onward, immigration enforcement was rebranded as national security. Detention centers multiplied. Private prison companies like GEO Group and CoreCivic got massive federal contracts. Under Obama, deportations reached record highs, nearly 3 million. Under Trump, we saw family separation reinstated as an official deterrence strategy. Children in cages, parents deported without their children, and now under the new Trump administration, we're watching an even more aggressive expansion of the playbook. This time, backed by military force. But here's what history also shows us. Every era of cruelty birthed an era of resistance. Indigenous parents smuggled songs and stories into boarding schools so their children wouldn't forget who they were. Chinese families created paper networks to stay connected even when the law said they couldn't. Mexican and Japanese American activists built solidarity movements long before the term immigration rights even existed. And today, across cities like Portland and Chicago, communities are doing what people have always done. Showing up for one another, sharing food, housing, legal aid, protection, hope. Because while the state has always tried to separate us, people have always found their way back to one another. And that's the real story. Not the cruelty, but the care that survived it. These stories can overwhelm, but there is something you can do. Even one act of care ripples. You can support mutual aid and on-the-ground groups. In Chicago, organizations like Latino Union and RISE, the Resilience and Solidarity and Equity, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICIRR, and local faith-based groups are distributing food, offering legal clinics, helping families with Know Your Rights training. In Portland, groups like Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition, the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, and Portland Against Deportations are doing daily support work, offering translation, accompaniment to ICE check-ins, and community defense. If you live elsewhere, find your local immigrant justice organization, legal defense fund, or migrant mutual aid network. Volunteer time, donate funds, offer your skills, translation, organizing, outreach, even sharing trusted resources. Here's how to contest a warrant. Here's a hotline number can save someone's life. You can pressure elected leaders. Call, email, tweet your representatives, especially city council members, mayors, state legislators, U.S. senators, and representatives. Demand they oppose militarized enforcement and support oversight. Ask them to support laws limiting military involvement in civil policing, protecting sanctuary policies, ending local cooperation with ICE, and expanding access to legal representation for asylum workers and limiting detention time. Use scripts and coordinate with advocacy groups so you're not acting alone. Engage through petitions, campaigns, media, write op-eds, post on social media, join phone banks or public actions. And stay informed, stay in community, subscribe to local immigrant justice newsletters, amplify personal stories, tweet, repost, share podcasts like this one. Use your platform, whether that's in the classroom, your workplace, your church, to educate others, host events, build alliances between immigrant and non-immigrant communities. Because resistance isn't just about saying no to cruelty. It's saying yes to care, solidarity, safety, and justice. And I want to close with a story of belonging, an antidote to fear. In Chicago, when word spread of an ICE raid in a South Side apartment building, local neighbors rushed to help. They brought diapers, food, water, blankets. Churches opened their doors. Lawyers and organizers showed up. For many families, these were the only hands they could trust in that moment. In Portland, when a community activist learned that people were being detained overnight at the ICE facility, she organized nightly vigils. Residents brought lanterns, shared prayers, and formed human chains so people wouldn't be pulled away quietly. The city's move to issue a land use violation notice against the ICE building was partly inspired by these protests. Belonging looks like showing up even when the walls are loud. Belonging is the gentle resistance inside courage. Belonging is turning toward the other instead of turning away. Because borders are built by policy, but belonging is built by people. And every porch light left on, every hot meal shared, every vigil held weakens the walls meant to keep apart. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Blooming Resistance.